as well as some advice for imposter syndrome and struggles as a new grad or as a student studying computer science. So I have been a software engineer at AWS for about a year and a half now. I started working a few months after I graduated college. This is a picture of my team and I playing Among Us at the office. So for some more background, I attended community college actually for 2 years in California, and then I transferred to UCLA, which I spent another 2 years at, and I graduated in 2022. I earned a bachelor's in math of computation there, which is a degree that combines elements of both math and computer science. So I actually do not have a computer science bachelor's degree. And here are some of my hobbies. I really like editing videos and making YouTube videos. I actually don't ever explicitly tell people that I do social media, but I do have a lot of software engineering resources on my platform, so I wanted to share it. I also really love dancing. I was on a competitive team when I was at school. I don't dance competitively anymore, but more as like a hobby, and I really like playing games. These are some of the games that have inspired me in the last 20 something years of my life. Okay, that's enough about me. I'm going to now pivot to interviews, and I am going to be talking from the perspective of a new grad for all of this. So just a short disclaimer to take this with a grain of salt. Some people may disagree with what I say today, but this is all from my experience. Okay, so this is the general interview process for a new grad software engineering role. It does vary from company to company, but this is the general format. It starts with a recruiter call, and sometimes you'll have an online assessment, and then you'll have your first and final rounds, and each round is usually an hour each of 45-minute technical and then a 15-minute behavioral. And then the final round is just like 3 to 4 back-to-back rounds of that. And for how we break that down, this is how I like to see it. We have studying, we have technical portion of the interview, and then we have the behavioral portion of the interview. And I'm not going to go too in depth with all of this because there are tons of resources out there, and I want to focus more on things that are harder to find online. So I don't have anything too special when it comes to studying. Basically 4 things. LeetCode, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. But if you haven't, it's basically a website that has a bunch of interview preparation and data structure questions. Blind 75, which I'm also sure a lot of you have heard of. It's a list of 75 LeetCode questions consisting of different but common patterns. NeetCode, who is a YouTuber who walks through LeetCode questions, and he also has his own website, which I also find very helpful, and mock interviews. Mock interviews, I think, should be more emphasized because, in my opinion, no matter how good you are at LeetCoding, you will most likely fail your first interview if you don't have experience LeetCoding in an interview setting, because that's very different from just LeetCoding on your own. So that's where mock interviews can come in. So make sure you interview with friends, and there's also websites where you can interview with strangers and be interviewed by strangers. The only con is that they might not be that good at interviewing, but still, I think it's a really, really good resource. Okay, so now breaking that down even further. This is how I approach technical interviews. I feel like this is the pretty ideal way to approach technical interviews. So you read the problem, you ask clarifying questions, you share a brute force solution, a more optimal solution, you write some pseudocode, and then you do the actual code. For some general advice though, try not to stay silent for more than 1 minute. 1 minute doesn't sound very long, but in an interview, it feels very long, and you should be thinking out loud and be engaging with your interviewer. And so you should ask questions like, does that sound good to you so far? Like when you're done coding, make sure you walk through the solution. And something you have to remember is that the interviewer is there to help you. If they're trying to guide you down another possible solution and they're trying to get away from like your current solution, you're probably wrong. So just keep that in mind. Okay, behavioral. I think behavioral is very, very overlooked. It is just as important, if not more important, than the technical, in my opinion, simply because of human nature. For example, I am more inclined to hire someone who is pretty good at coding, but excellent at communication, over someone who is really, really good at coding, but they might not be able to work well with others. So in general, you should be able to tell a story. So I really recommend practicing storytelling. This is the STAR method. It's a very common method on how you can tell stories. It stands for situation, task, action, result. But the general rule of thumb for me is that you should master 5 to 6 stories that can demonstrate different leadership principles. And what this actually means is you should have 5 to 6 stories that are different, that demonstrate different parts of a company's culture. So Leadership principles are actually specific to Amazon, but it's basically just company culture. So have stories that resonate with their culture. So for example, I might have one story for learn and be curious, one for bias for action. And so it's different for every company, but I do think leadership principles from Amazon, it's a good blueprint. Yeah, okay. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was imposter syndrome. I don't think people talk about this enough. This is something that I experienced a lot when I was at UCLA and also when I started as a new grad, especially as a new grad, because everyone around me just seems so smart and it feels like I don't know anything at all. It's gotten better, as I have more experience, but I think this is something a lot of engineers experience as a new grad. And so I have some pieces of advice for that. The first one is to ask questions shamelessly. Um, People are usually nicer than you think they are. They're usually more willing to help. And if someone doesn't want to help you, that says more about them than you because you're just trying to ask questions and to learn. So it's okay to ask questions shamelessly. You should ask questions shamelessly. The second thing is that experience a lot of the time trumps intelligence. And I saw this a lot when I first started working, but something that one of my mentors shared with me was an analogy that I wanted to share with you guys today. So if I asked you to recite the lyrics of your favorite song, assuming it's in your first language, I think you would be able to do it, right? But if I asked you to recite a song, the lyrics of a song that you had never heard before, you wouldn't be able to do it. No matter how smart you are, you cannot recite the lyrics of a song that you've never heard before. It's just not possible. So something to keep in mind at work is that the people who you think are smarter than you are just people who have listened to the same song over and over and over again. And this is just a song that you haven't heard before. And over time, you'll continue listening to the song and maybe you'll be able to recite the chorus or a verse, but it will take time and it's not a representation of your intelligence. And this is also applicable to school. I'm sure there's a lot of you guys here today, and I'm sure there's a lot of you who have started coding, who didn't start coding until you were like in college. And you might feel that you might feel smaller than those who started when they were young. And just remember that your peers have listened to the same song over and over again. And if it's your first time listening to it in college or when you declare your major your sophomore, junior year, that's perfectly fine. Remember that experience most of the time will trump intelligence. So just keep going, keep working hard. Yeah, that's pretty much all I had to share today. I really wanted to focus on things that are not as talked about. And so, yeah, I hope you guys have something you can take with you from my presentation.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I know you have to head out, so I'm going to ask you just one question and I'll ask the audience to drop their questions in the chat right now. So, Jessica, if you want to stop sharing my screen, I'm just going to come here and take over.
Okay.
This is your LinkedIn.
Yes.
And when I look at a resume, I tell people, because I've done a lot of resume reviews, probably 1,000 at this point. I tell people you want your profile to be so good, so like it's like a machine gun of gun of accomplishments, and it shows you like the amount of force and veracity that you have when someone looks at it. What's next for you? What do you want to do? What's the next step for you? And couple that with what do you think you're lacking right now? What keeps you up at night? Like, what is the worst thing that you struggle with? If you just answer these two questions.
Uh, wow, that's a very loaded question. Um, okay, so the first part was what's next? Well, I've been working for about a year and a half now, and usually around the 2 year mark is when you start getting promoted to software engineer two. And so at work, that's kind of what I've been trying to focus on, not specifically promotion, but becoming a stronger engineer so that when the time comes that I'll be ready for that. I think I am trying to grow a stronger foundation in programming because like I said, I graduated with a math degree, so I don't think my foundation is as strong as the other people, my other peers that I work with. And so that's something that I want to improve. And what was the second part of your question?
Yeah, what keeps you up at night? Like, what do you struggle with? Like what is your, yeah.
Um, I think something I struggle with um would be separating work and life. I think that I've done a pretty good job of it, especially the more I work. But I think that sometimes I feel too stressed about work, too anxious about work. And so I think I have to learn how to separate that. I also think that this is a problem that a lot of engineers struggle with. And so that is something that I would like to work on.